Nobody asked the kitchen staff what we thought about first contact. That is the part people always leave out when they tell the story, the part that gets edited away in favor of admirals and committee chambers, and the footage of the Aviath ships settling through cloud cover like slow silver coins dropped from an impossible height. 14 ships on the first morning, then 31 by afternoon. Then, by the third dawn, 67 of them, arranged in a holding pattern that our orbital analysts said corresponded to no military formation they had ever catalogued, but that our atmospheric physicists said matched almost exactly the thermal convection cells of a large cumulus cloud system, which was either deeply meaningful or completely coincidental, and no one ever agreed on which. I was not watching the ships come in, I was counting eggs. Specifically, I was counting the dried egg powder in the number 4 store tent, which had developed a slow seam leak sometime in the previous 48 hours, and had consequently absorbed enough morning humidity to cake into a single dense mass at the base of the container. It was going to be completely useless for the morning meal cycle, unless I broke it up by hand before 6:30. The smell of hydrated egg powder that has gone slightly off is not something I would recommend. It is one of those smells that makes a person breathe through their mouth and think hard about career choices. I had been at it for 20 minutes when Corporal Dees came in and told me that the Aviath had sent a delegation to the forward perimeter, that command had agreed to let them walk the logistics corridor as a confidence measure, and that our kitchen was apparently on the route. I asked Dees whether I should stop what I was doing. He said probably not, since the whole point of the confidence measure was to show that we were not alarmed and that normal operations were continuing normally. So I kept breaking up egg powder, and the delegation came through about an hour and a quarter later. There were 11 of them. I know people tend to describe aliens in terms of what they are not quite human, not quite anything familiar, so I will try to do better than that. The Aviath at that stage of contact were understood to be a convergent species. Each individual body carried its own locomotion, its own sensory apparatus, its own musculature, and a partial cortex that handled immediate local processing. The full mind, the thing that actually thought, planned, remembered, felt, was distributed across the collective. Not in the way the word gets misused to mean each body held an equal share. It was more like each body was a finger, and the hand existed somewhere above all of them, and the hand was aware through all the fingers at once, and each finger knew it was not the hand but also knew it was part of it. That is the closest I have been able to get to it in 20 years of trying. In practice, it meant that when they walked through the kitchen corridor, they did not look at things the way a person looks at something. They registered. Their heads moved in small, coordinated arcs, fractionally out of phase with each other, the way a murmuration of birds adjusts across the whole flock in response to a shift at the edge. 11 bodies, 11 pairs of eyes, 11 sets of nostrils working, and somewhere above or behind or between all of it, one thing taking it all in simultaneously. The handler assigned to walk them through was a lieutenant named Brusque, young, clearly briefed to within an inch of his competence and working hard not to show it. He was talking at a measured pace about logistics capacity and daily throughput figures, the sort of numbers that sound reassuring because they are large and suggest organization. The delegates were not watching him. They were watching everything else. They walked past the cold store, with its condensation on the exterior panels and the dim hum of the compressor. They walked past the prep tables where 3 of my people were working on vegetable peel that had to go into the broth within the hour. Orville with her knife moving in the short, quick strokes she uses on tough root vegetables. Sen doing the aromatics. The young one whose name I kept forgetting on carry work shifting crates. They walked past the water purification lines and the fuel cells for the range units and the long crate stacks along the north wall, all of it bright in the late morning light pouring through the open south face of the tent. They registered all of it, with those slightly asynchronous heads and the soft ticking sound that I later learned was how the Aviath body units communicated local data to each other in the absence of the longer-range convergence signal. a kind of shorthand. An interim note passed between fingers while the hand was busy elsewhere. Their ticking had pitch and rhythm variations I could not decode then, and can only partially interpret now. But even on that first morning I could hear that it was not random. There was information in it. Then one of them stopped. The others kept moving for half a pace, and then they stopped too, not in a startled way, but the way a single organism stops, immediately, completely, without the small staggered delay you get when 11 independent people each decide to halt at slightly different moments. They all just stopped, as if the decision had been made above them and communicated downward in less time than a nerve takes to fire. Lieutenant Brusque turned around. The one that had stopped was looking at the meal ticket station. It was not complicated. It was a folding table, a tin box to hold the used tickets, a hand stamp with red ink in a pad that I replaced every 2 weeks, and a stack of pre-cut cards held down by a river stone I had picked up somewhere along the way because the standard issue weight for the card stack had gone missing in the 3rd relocation, and I had never gotten a replacement. Each card was about the size of 2 fingers placed side by side, made of buff-colored cardstock that came in blocks of 500 from supply. A printed grid of 6 numbered boxes on one face, that was all. When a unit drew rations, the duty cook stamped 1 box for each portion. A card fully stamped was fully used. Simple logistical accounting. We had used the same system for 11 years because it worked, and because the alternative required a power draw, we could not always guarantee, and that also required everybody to remember their access codes after a long shift, which they reliably did not. She was looking at the card stack. I say she now because that is how I think of her, though the Oviath have no sex in the human sense and the linguistic conventions for referring to individual delegates were still being sorted out at that stage. She is the one this story is about, so she is she. She was not looking at anything in particular about the card stack, not at the red ink or the tin box or the river stone or the hand stamp. She was looking at the whole arrangement with a quality of attention I have seen, once or twice in my working life, from people who are genuinely hungry and have not yet decided whether they are allowed to say so. Not aggressive hunger, the cautious kind. The kind that has learned to be quiet about itself, because announcing need has not, historically, been a reliable way to get need met. I noticed it because I notice it. You do in this work. Hungry people in a kitchen have a particular quality of stillness. They stop moving more than necessary because moving costs energy, and at some level below conscious decision they are rationing themselves. She had that quality. All 11 of them had it, I realized when I looked properly, but it was most concentrated in her, the way a bruise is most present at the point of impact. I looked at Brusque. He was looking at his briefing materials, trying to locate his place in the route description. I looked at the other delegates. They were looking at her, which meant the hand was registering what her finger had registered, and the other fingers were turning their attention toward the same point. Then she looked at me. I have been asked what it was like to have an Oviath look directly at you, and I always say it is hard to describe without sounding either mystical or clinical, and people always say please try, and I always say it felt like being read. Not scanned. A scan is fast and doesn't care about what it finds. Not assessed in the way a threat analysis system assesses, reducing everything to a risk profile. Read. The way you read a sentence, giving it time and attention to understand what it is saying rather than what you expected it to say. I said, "Are you hungry?" This was not in any protocol I had been briefed on. There was no protocol for this situation. The 12 pages of contact guidance I had received 2 weeks prior covered: do not initiate physical contact, do not display open flames in a demonstrative manner, do not attempt to convey humor until the xenolinguistics team had established a baseline for tonal register, respond to any direct query from a delegate with calm, short sentences, refer all substantive questions to the assigned liaison. It did not cover. What to do if a member of the Aviath delegation stares at your meal ticket station with the eyes of a person who has not eaten properly in some time. She did not answer immediately. The other 10 delegates made the ticking sound a brief, soft exchange, and then she said something to Brusque's translation unit that the unit rendered as, "The body requires intervals of reintegration. During intervals, intake is reduced." Which was the diplomatic version, I thought of, yes, but it is more complicated than that, and I am not sure I should admit it in front of 11 humans and a recording device. I said that happens to my staff too. On long operations the eating gets irregular. You want something. Brusque said quietly, without moving his lips much, "Ren." I said, also without moving my lips much, "She's not going to take offense at being offered food, Lieutenant." There was a pause. The delegation held still. She kept her attention on me in that reading way, patient, not pressuring, just fully present. I said, "What does your body need? Protein, carbohydrate, something else? I'm not going to poison anyone. I just want to know what I'm working with." The translation unit took a moment with this. She said something that came out as, "Primary substrate, warm, dense, not complex compounds." I said, "Broth." She looked at the word, or rather, at the sound the unit gave for the word, as though it had a weight to it she had not expected. I went to the range. The morning's bone and vegetable reduction had been going since the previous evening. It was dark amber by now, concentrated and clean-smelling, the kind of broth that does not announce itself dramatically but fills a space quietly and makes a body understand it is being taken care of. I ladled it into a field cup, not the disposable kind we used for high-volume draws, the metal kind with the folding handle that we reserved for units going to be at the counter long enough to want something that held heat. I did this without thinking about it particularly. The choice was automatic. The automatic choices are the ones that have been made so many times they no longer need to be decided. I carried the cup to her and held it out. She looked at it. The other 10 delegates looked at it. The ticking went through them in a wave, pitch varying, longer than the previous exchange. She took the cup with both hands, not the way you take something from a stranger, with the slight distance and carefulness of not wanting to presume, the way you take something you have needed for a while and are only now being given permission to reach for. She drank it. I watched, because I was standing there and looking away would have been stranger than watching. I am not sentimental about food. I have been in this work long enough that sentimentality burned off some years back. Around the time I understood that what I was actually doing was not cooking, but keeping people functional, which is a slightly different project and a harder one, because it means the measure of a meal is not whether it was enjoyed, but whether the person who ate it could go and do what needed doing afterward. But there is something that happens when you give someone something to eat who genuinely needed it, something different from the transaction of giving someone what they ordered or what the manifest says they are entitled to. It is quieter. It is more like completing something, a gap being closed. The other 10 delegates went very still, not the stopped organism stillness from when she had spotted the ticket station. A different kind, the stillness that is attention at its absolute limit, when a thing is happening that the observer has decided to miss nothing of. She finished the cup. She lowered it with both hands, the way she had lifted it, and held it a moment before placing it on the counter. Then Brusque said, "We should probably continue the route," in the tone of a man who is aware that he will be writing a detailed report about the last 5 minutes. I said, "She can come back." He said, "What?" I said, "For a second bowl if she wants one." I looked at her directly. "The draw is 1 cup per ticket, but I have extra tickets today. 2 units didn't show up this morning, pulled to perimeter work, so I'm running under head count. I can issue 1. The translation unit turned this over. She said something back. It came out as, "The ticket is the permission." I said, "Yes, 1 ticket, 1 draw. but the system allows me to issue undrawn tickets when I have surplus capacity, and today I do. She looked at the station, the stack of cards, the stamp, the river stone, with the same quality of attention she had given it when they first came in, but different now. The difference between looking at something you do not understand and looking at something you are beginning to. I went to the station. I took a card from the stack, third one down. Buff cardstock, printed grid of 6 numbered boxes, all empty. I held it for a moment, then I picked up my folding knife from the ledge and I cut the card in half across its middle, clean cut, the knife going through paper without catching. The top half had boxes 1, 2, and 3, the bottom half had boxes 4, 5, and 6. I set the bottom half aside. I picked up the hand stamp, pressed it against the red pad, and stamped box 1 on the top half. 1 box stamped, 2 remaining. I held the top half out to her. She looked at it for a moment that stretched slightly past comfortable into something I did not have a name for yet. Then she took it, both hands again, the way she took the cup. I said boxes 2 and 3 are still open. That means you can come back twice more before we close at 1400, or send someone else with it. The ticket works for whoever carries it. It doesn't have to be you. The translation unit worked on this. She looked at the half card in her hands. She looked at the stamped box and the 2 empty ones. She looked at the cut edge, where the card had been one thing and was now half of something. The ticking went through the group again. Longer this time, with more pitch variation. The most complex exchange they had made since arriving. Brusque said at a slightly different volume, "Ren, is that?" "It's a meal ticket," I said. "It's how we track draws." The delegation moved on. She went with them, the half card held in one hand at her side, carefully, without gripping it hard, the way you carry something you do not want to crease. I filed the morning draw numbers, broke down the prep station for mid-cycle rotation, and switched the broth pot to its holding temperature. 340 regular draws to account for across the lunch cycle. The generator issue on range unit 2, a capacitor fault that Dees thought he could fix with what was on hand. A running argument with supply chain about a herb substitution in the previous week's delivery. The usual wait of the day. At 12:47, Dees said quietly, "Sarge, window." She was standing at the service window, the opening in the south wall of the tent, counter height, the kind of ledge arrangement that does not need explaining. She was alone. The other 10 delegates were not with her. She had the half card in her hand. I came to the window. I took the card, pressed box 2 with the stamp, returned the card to her. Then I filled a clean metal cup and set it on the counter. She took the cup. Then she stayed. This was not what the transaction called for. The transaction was draw, receive, withdraw. But she stayed at the window, the cup in both hands, and she drank slowly, and she looked out at the field beyond the tent while she did it. The field was scrub grass and pale soil, and at the far end, the edge of the tree line where the survey crew had put their ranging markers. The afternoon light was coming in flat and warm. A dry wind was moving through the grass in the way that makes you think briefly of other places, other fields, other moments when you stood still long enough to simply be in a moment rather than moving through it. I have a south-facing window at home. When I am on leave, I drink my morning coffee at it. I look at the street below. I am not looking for anything. I am just being a person in a resting moment, holding something warm, not needing to be anywhere yet. That is what she was doing at my service window, being a body that had been fed, resting in the way that a fed body rests. I let her do it. I went back to the range and minded my business. After a while she said something to the translation unit at her belt. It rendered, "The warm substance. It is not simply substrate." I said, without turning around, "No. It reduces over about 16 hours from bone and vegetable. By the time it gets to you, most of the water has cooked off, and what remains is more concentrated. The others," she said, "they have consumed it, your units. The ones that came through this morning, yes, 300 and some." A pause, and they are functioning. Better than before breakfast, I said. Usually that's the point. I heard the convergence hum then for the first time at close range, not the local body-to-body ticking, but the deeper signal, the frequency the xenolinguistics team would later describe as the hand receiving from the fingers rather than the fingers talking among themselves. Not loud. A frequency you feel in your back teeth more than hear with your ears. Brief. Then gone. She said, the card, the halved card. I turned around. She had it out again, looking at the cut edge. The two stamps, boxes 1 and 2 and box 3 still empty. Yes, I said. This half, it belongs to me, she said. For today, I said, one more draw on it. The other half. I kept it, I said, or I set it aside. It goes in the discard at the end of the draw period, incinerated with the spent tickets. She looked at the half in her hands. Her thumb moved across the cut edge, feeling it. The half that remains with me is permission, she said through the unit. The half that is gone, it was also permission. You divided it. Yes, I said. You did not take the permission from another unit. You made it from what was unused. From the fact that we were under headcount today. 2 tickets in the system that won't be drawn. So the total capacity is the same, I just moved some of it. The hum came again, longer. Among the Aviath, she said, there is no word for this. I thought about that. Not what to say. Just the fact of it. A species that had achieved interstellar travel and convergent cognition across 67 ships, that had mapped the thermal convection patterns of our atmosphere before landing, that apparently had a diplomatic lexicon capable of conveying reintegration intervals and primary substrate requirements with reasonable precision. And they did not have a word for splitting a ration ticket. It's not a complicated thing, I said. You needed 2 draws, the card covers 1. So I cut it in 2 and now it covers 2, 1 at a time. But the permission was whole, she said. The permission was unused, I said. That's different from whole. Unused permission isn't doing anything. I put it to use. The hum that followed was the longest yet. I went to the broth pot and rotated it on the range, because it needed doing and because standing still and watching someone process what you have just said feels intrusive regardless of species. When the hum stopped, she said, the Aviath move resource, we move attention, we move convergence. Permission is assigned to a body. It belongs to that body or it does not exist. That sounds like a lot of wasted permission, I said. She did not respond immediately. The translation unit offered nothing for several seconds, which I took to mean her response was not in words. 1 remaining, she said finally, touching the card, box 3. 1 remaining, I said, before 1400. She put the cup on the counter, lowering it, both hands, carefully, and she left. 30 meters out she stopped and turned, not to look at me but at the tent at the window. Then she kept walking. Dee said behind me, that was strange. That was lunch service, I said, more or less. I want to be clear about what happened at 1353, because this is the part that has been reported the most and gotten wrong the most often. She did not come back alone. I was at the clean-down sink when Dee said, very quietly, Sarge. I turned around. All 11 of them were coming across the field, not following a briefed route, not with brusque. On their own, walking in the coordinated, slightly asynchronous way they moved, directly toward the service window. She was at the center of the arc. The geometry had reorganized around her, the way a flock reorganizes around the element carrying the relevant information. They stopped at the window. She put the half card on the counter. I picked it up and pressed box 3, stamped. All 3 boxes on the top half now filled. I handed the card back to her. Last one, I said. She looked at the card, the 3 stamped boxes, the cut edge, the buff cardstock. Then she folded it once carefully along its long axis, and she put it in the inner pocket of her garment. She pressed that pocket flat with her hand briefly, feeling the card through the fabric. "Your companions," I said. "They haven't drawn today." "This was my ticket," she said. "Yes," I said. "But we have 7 minutes before close, and anything left in the pot at close either goes into tomorrow's reduction or it gets poured out. I'd rather not pour it out." The translation unit gave them this. The ticking went through the group in a wave unlike any of the previous exchanges, faster, more varied, something urgent or intent in it. Then the convergence hum, longer than I had heard it yet, running under everything for a full half-minute before it subsided. She said, "They came because of what you did, the dividing. The convergence carried it, the data from my body's experience of the first draw, the second, and they all understood what had happened here. They wished to be present when the last stamp was made." A pause. Because the completion of a divided thing is, the unit paused, revised. We have no word for that either. I looked at the 10 of them in the arc. 10 faces with that reading a sentence quality of attention. 10 pairs of hands at their sides, not reaching, not requesting, just present, in the way you are present at something that matters even when you are not the one it is happening to. Like bearing witness. The formal human word for that is witness. I did not know then whether the Oviath had a word for it. I know now that they did, and that it is a very old word in their lexicon, one of the oldest, and that it is built into the structure of convergence at a level that predates most of their recorded history. They are a species that witnesses things together, I was told much later. Not all things most experience is processed at the local level by the individual body, with the hand only receiving what the finger decides to share. But some things, a body chooses to share fully, unfiltered, in real time, to open the channel wide and let the hand feel everything the finger feels. That is an act. It is the choice the finger makes, and not all fingers make it, and not all moments earn it. She had made that choice with the first bowl of broth. I did not know that then. I know it now. I said, "Give me a few minutes." I went to the range. The pot was on its last hour of good heat, 2 liters, maybe a little more. I got the metal cups, all 11, because we had exactly 11. I filled them one at a time, working steadily. Her cup last, brought to the window first. Then I looked at the counter. 11 cups, no tickets for 10 of them. I took the grease pencil from the ledge above the range and I tore 11 strips from the wrapping paper. The vegetable crates came in heavy brown paper that tears cleanly if you fold and score it first. I marked each strip with a single line. Not a number, not a grid, not a stamped box, a line. The simplest mark I know how to make that mean something rather than nothing. I put a strip beside each cup. I looked at her and said, "Not the same as a proper card, but the idea is the same, a mark that says you're allowed." She looked at the strips for a long moment, then she looked at me. The 10 of them stepped forward. Each took a cup and a strip. She took hers. They drank. The light was late afternoon, still bright through the south wall. The field behind them was pale grass and survey markers. The convergence hum ran quietly under the sounds of the kitchen, the cooling range, the drip from the sink, the faint creak of the tent fabric. 11 cups being lifted. The small sounds of people eating who needed to eat, and the quieter sound that comes after when the eating is done and the body knows it. They set the cups on the counter. She set her wrapping paper strip beside her cup. The others kept their strips. I noticed that. I did not say anything. She said, "The Oviath will return tomorrow." I said, "We'll be open at 0700. The record of this," she said, "the division and the completion, may we carry documentation." "The card is in your pocket," I said. She touched that pocket through the fabric. "Yes," she said. Then they left. Brusk found me at close down. He looked the way young officers look when something has happened outside their briefing, and they have not yet determined whether to be alarmed. He said, "Do you want to tell me what that was?" "Kitchen operation," I said. "Unusual draw pattern." He said, "They came back, off agenda, all of them." "I know. Command is going to want a report." Write one, I said. Tell them she was hungry. Tell them I had extra broth and 2 unused tickets in the system. Tell them I cut a card in half because the math called for 2 draws and I didn't want to open a full card for 2. Nothing left the system that wasn't already there. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you know that's not what they want explained. I know, I said. The rest is your job and Kerv's, not mine. He left. I finished the washdown and the close log and handed off to the night crew. I went back to my billet and lay on my back and listened to the obvious ships in the upper atmosphere. The convergence hum, faint at this distance, a frequency below what you would call a note. It had been there since the 3rd day. You stopped noticing it and then you noticed it again, the way you notice a river only after you have been near it long enough to stop actively listening for it. I took the bottom half of the card out of my breast pocket. I had put it there during close down, taking it out of the discard box without quite deciding to. The bottom half, boxes 4, 5, and 6, all empty. Permission that had remained, that had never been used, the part of the card that had stayed on my side of the cut. I held it up in the dim light. Then I put it in the zip pocket of my field jacket, where I keep things I am not going to lose. They came back the next morning. Not just the 11, a larger group, with 2 translators from the Aviath side who had not been present on the corridor walk. Brusk brought the xenolinguistics lead, a woman named Kerv who had the permanent, slightly over-caffeinated look of someone who had been waiting years for a problem she actually wanted to solve. I made broth, I issued tickets, the draw ran normally. At one point Kerv came to the service window and said, "The primary delegate, the one from yesterday. She's asking about the card." "Which card?" I said, though I knew. "The halved one. She wants to know if she can see the half you kept." I took the bottom half out of my breast pocket and put it on the counter. 3 empty boxes, cut edge along the top. Kerv looked at it and then at me. "Why did you keep it?" "She had hers," I said. "I should have mine." Kerv thought about this. "I need to talk to you at length about yesterday, for the record." "After service," I said. "Before that, I have 340 draws to manage." We talked for 2 hours that evening. She asked me to describe the interactions in sequence, not just what was said but what I observed, the timing of the convergence hums, the changes in the ticking, what the delegate had done with the card at each stage. I told her everything I have told here, in the same order, with less reflection and more factual description. When I finished, Kerv sat quietly for a moment, looking at her notes. Then she said, "The phrase divided permission. You told her permission could be moved from where it wasn't being used." "Yes. That concept, permission as mobile, as redirectable rather than simply belonging to whoever it was assigned, that appears to be genuinely absent from the Aviath framework. Not suppressed, not taboo, just not there. They seem not to have encountered it before in any of their prior contact history." I said, "How is that possible for a species that's been in contact with other civilizations?" Kerv said, "That's one of several questions the last 48 hours have opened up." She made a note. "The other is the significance of the completion. The 3rd draw with all 10 present. She described it as the completion of a divided thing. The convergence carried the emotional data of the 1st draw across all 11. She let it be fully shared, unfiltered, and they all experienced the incompleteness of an unfinished sequence as something requiring witness. The way you'd want to be present," I said slowly, "when a story gets its ending." Kerv looked at me. "Yes, that's a close translation of what she described." I thought about the 10 of them keeping their wrapping paper strips, she leaving hers on the counter. I said she left her strip behind. "You mentioned that. Why do you think she did?" "I don't know," I said. "The card was already in her pocket, the real one, the proper half card. Maybe the strip wasn't the genuine article and she didn't want something that wasn't, or maybe leaving something is also an act." I stopped. "I don't know, I'm a cook." Kerv wrote something. The Xenolinguistics team is going to spend considerable time on this conversation. All right, I said. Tell them I'm happy to talk again after service. The formal treaty was finalized 3 years after the first contact. I was not involved. I was on a different posting by then, running a larger operation, the same work at larger scale. I heard about the signing through the general announcement. Months later, Karev sent me a message. She had been attached to the treaty team through most of the process. The message said that there was a section of the final treaty, a rider, a paragraph that the Aviath delegation had spent 4 months insisting on in terms the human diplomatic team had found largely opaque, until the Xenolinguistics team arrived at a translation close enough to work from, describing the nature of the agreement between the two species. Not as a treaty in the conventional sense, not as a compact between powers, a mutual security arrangement, a trade framework, or a statement of territorial boundaries, all of which were covered elsewhere in the usual language. This paragraph described the agreement as a division of what remained, not a sharing of what was held in common, not a pooling of existing resources, a division of what remained, the surplus, the unclaimed, the permission that was not being applied and could be, the part that did not have to be given and was. They had the word by then. The Xenolinguistics team believes they built it from the kitchen event, from the ticket, from what they had called when they still lacked the word, the remainder that chooses. I read the message twice. Then I took the half card out of the zip pocket of my field jacket. The bottom half, boxes 4, 5, and 6, all empty, the cut edge along the top, the buff cardstock, slightly soft at the corners now from 3 years of being carried. 3 years of permission that had remained. I put it on my desk and it has been there since. Not framed, not displayed, just sitting beside the lamp, 3 empty boxes facing up. It is not a relic. It is the bottom half of a ration card that I cut with my field knife on a Tuesday morning in a logistics tent because someone was hungry and the ticket system needed to cover 2 draws instead of 1. I do not know what she did with her half. I assume she has it. Wherever the hand has gone, wherever the finger still reaches, there is a pocket in a garment somewhere with a card in it, folded once along its long axis, 3 boxes stamped. She had seemed like a person who kept the genuine article. When the Aviath delegation left, the 67 ships rising through cloud cover in the slow, falling coin reversal of their arrival, she did not come to the window to say goodbye. I did not expect her to. The card was fully drawn. You do not come back to a kitchen when the card is spent. I am not sure what I would have said in any case. What I did was not a decision in the way people seem to want it to have been. It was not diplomacy. It was not a calculated gesture toward cross-species understanding. It was not wisdom. I was standing in a kitchen on the 3rd morning of first contact, behind on the egg powder, worried about a generator, and a person who needed food was at my counter. I filled the cup. I gave it to her. I cut the card in half because the math called for 2 draws and I had a knife and the card was there. If there is something worth saying about that, something that survives the translation into whatever the Aviath called it when they built their word for the remainder that chooses, I think it is just this. When you have something and someone needs it, and the only barrier between them and it is a logistical one that can be solved with a knife and a grease pencil, you solve the logistical problem. You do not wait for the paperwork to catch up. You cut the card and you stamp the box and you put the cup on the counter. Everything that came after was built on top of that. 67 ships, 3 years of negotiations, a treaty paragraph about the division of what remained. All of it built on top of a cut ticket and a bowl of warm broth and a woman standing at a south-facing window in the afternoon light, looking out at a scrub grass field, resting. There are things I have not yet said about the card system, about how it works and why it works the way it does, because they seemed like logistical background and I did not want to slow the story down. But I find, writing this out now after 20 years, that they matter. Not to the events. The events happened the way they happened regardless of whether I explained the system, but to the understanding of what I did and why it was something worth doing and not just a cook making an unauthorized modification to a supply tracking procedure. The meal ticket is not a fancy thing. It was designed during the second expansion, when the logistics core was trying to solve a specific problem, units drawing more than their allotted rations. Not because they were dishonest, mostly, but because the system that preceded the ticket was a verbal end log system. A cook called out a unit number, and someone made a mark in a ledger. And it was easy to lose track, especially in high-tempo operations when a unit might draw from 3 different kitchens in a single day, and no one kitchen had visibility into what the others had issued. People went hungry because other people had inadvertently drawn double. That is the thing the ticket solved. One card stamped down, exhausted. You could not draw twice from the same card because the boxes were finite. You could not lose track of what you had already drawn. What the system was not designed to do was account for unused capacity in real time. The assumption baked into the design was that issued tickets would be fully drawn, that the unit count and the ticket count would match, and that at close of service whatever remained uneaten would simply be waste. The waste line was built into the logistics calculus. It was not a failure of the system. It was a feature. In high-tempo operations, you run the numbers at the high end, and you accept some waste because the alternative, running tight and running short, is worse. What I did on the third morning of first contact was use the waste. I took the permission that was going to expire unused and I moved it. The total calories in the system did not change. The total draw capacity did not change. The waste line absorbed it either way. Either it was going to be 11 cups of broth at the end of service, or it was going to be 10. I moved 1 cup from the waste column to the served column by the method of cutting a piece of cardstock in half and stamping one of the resulting halves. That is all. That is the technical description. The reason I am telling you this is because of what she said, that the Aviath did not move permission. That permission, in their framework, was assigned to a body and belonged to it or did not exist. When I explained that I had moved the permission from where it wasn't being used from the waste column effectively, from the allocated but undrawn portion of the day's capacity, she had no word for that. Not because the concept was strange to her in an alien way, like explaining color to someone without eyes. More like explaining a mechanical solution to someone who has always solved the same problem a different way, and never considered that the other way existed. I have thought in the years since about what their version of waste looks like. If permission belongs to a body and cannot be divided or transferred, then unused permission at the end of a period simply disappears. It does not go to someone who needed it. It does not get folded into the next period's allocation. It was assigned, it was not used, it is gone. The body it was assigned to might have needed it and not been able to access it for some reason. A body that was injured or occupied elsewhere or in reintegration. And the permission would simply not have been there for that body the next time because it had expired with the previous period's accounting. That is not a moral failing on the Aviath's part. It is a design. Their convergence handles resource allocation at a level I cannot fully understand. And for all I know, the permission expiration is a feature of their system for the same reason the waste line is a feature of mine, because running tight and running short is worse than accepting some loss. I am not a xenolinguist. I cannot tell you whether their system is better or worse than mine at the things systems are trying to do. What I can tell you is that when I showed her a different way of solving the problem by making a cut, by creating 2 portions from one authorization, by moving the unused permission rather than letting it expire, she experienced it as genuinely new, not shocking, not threatening. New in the way that a tool you have never seen before is new. You immediately understand what it is for, and you immediately wonder why you did not have it before, and you understand that not having had it has cost you something, though you could not have said how much before you knew the tool existed. That, I think, is what the convergence carried when she shared the first draw experience unfiltered with all 11 of them. Not just the taste of the broth, not just the physical sensation of a hungry body being fed. The knowledge that a permission could be divided, that permission was not fixed and assigned and exhausted, that it could be cut in half, that the halves could be used separately, that a person could give away part of their permission and retain part, and that both parts remained valid. 11 bodies went back to 67 ships carrying that knowledge. 67 ships processed it through however many millions of fingers the hand comprised. And somewhere in that processing, over the days and weeks that followed, something shifted in how the Aviath understood the negotiation they were engaged in with us, what they thought they were being asked to give up, and what they understood themselves to be able to offer in return. I'm not saying I brokered a treaty by cutting a ration card. I am saying that when the treaty was finally signed, the central concept it was built around, the division of what remained, the movement of unused capacity from where it was sitting idle to where it could do something, was a concept the Aviath had acquired 3 years earlier at a service window in a forward logistics tent, from a cook who was trying not to pour out 2 liters of good broth at the end of a draw cycle. I find this funny in a dry way, not the kind of funny that makes you laugh, the kind that makes you sit with it for a while. I have been asked more than once whether I feel like I should have received more recognition for my role in the contact events. I always say no, and I mean it, because the question misunderstands what I did and what recognition is for. Recognition is for people who made a decision and executed it at some cost to themselves. I made no decision. I had broth and someone needed it, and the ticket system needed a small adjustment. The cost to me was a 3-centimeter cut through a piece of cardstock. I would be embarrassed to be recognized for that. What I think about, instead of recognition, is the question of what it means to have done the thing without knowing what it was. To have made the cut and given the half card and put the cup on the counter, and not known, could not have known, that the cut was going through to something 67 ships deep. That it was being felt, simultaneously, by something vast and old and not remotely like me. That the stamp of box number 1 on a buff-colored half card in a forward kitchen on the 3rd morning of first contact was an event with a weight I was not equipped to feel at the time. I am still not sure I am equipped to feel it now. I am a cook. My equipment is calibrated for things you can taste and smell and count, for keeping 340 people functional across a meal cycle, for solving logistical problems with what is on hand. But I have the card, and I keep it, and when I look at the 3 empty boxes I think, unused permission, sitting there, still available, still choosing, the remainder of the remainder, the part that stayed on my side of the cut. Maybe that is what it means to have done a thing without knowing what it was. You carry the remainder. You do not use it. You let it be the part of the story that has not been finished yet, that is still out there somewhere, in another pocket, in another part of the world, waiting to be the last stamp, waiting to be the bowl someone needed, waiting to be the thing that gets shared unfiltered across a system vast enough to build a word from one encounter with a cook in a logistics tent on the 3rd morning of everything. She came back, that is the whole story. She came back for the 2nd bowl, and I had it for her. And the card was good for one more after that, and she used it, and she took the card home across however many light years separate what she is from what I am. And I kept the other half. That is all, that is everything. I want to say one more thing about the morning service. About the egg powder and the generator and the herb substitution, and the 340 regular draws, and all the small logistics of a forward kitchen on the 3rd day of the most significant event in human history. None of that paused. While she was standing at my window drinking the 2nd bowl and looking out at the field, Orville was working on her vegetable peel, and Sen was doing aromatics, and the young one was moving crates. The broth pot was on its rotation schedule. The capacitor fault on range unit 2 was going to need addressing before the dinner cycle. The herb argument with supply chain was still unresolved, and was going to remain unresolved for another 3 weeks, at which point I would escalate it to a level where it would be resolved in my favor, though the resolution would come too late for the batch I had actually needed the herbs for. The kitchen does not stop. That is the thing about it. The kitchen is not a dramatic place. It does not pause for significant events. It runs through them. The work needs to be done at the time it needs to be done, regardless of what else is happening, regardless of what else is at stake, regardless of whether the events unfolding around the kitchen have historical weight that the people inside it will not feel for another 20 years. I think this is actually the point. Not the elevated version of the point, not the version where the cook is a humble vessel through which history flows unaware. The actual practical point. The kitchen runs because people need to eat, and people need to eat regardless of what is happening. And if the kitchen stops because something important is happening outside it, then the important thing outside it has to happen without people who have eaten, which is always worse. I fed her because she needed it and I had it. I would have fed anyone who needed it and for whom I had it. That is the job. The job does not change because the person is an alien and the ships are 67, and the atmospheric physicists have just noted that the holding pattern matches a cumulus convection cell. The job is the same job it has always been. Keep the people in front of you functional. She was a person in front of me. I kept her functional. That the method I used to do it, cutting the card, dividing the permission, offering the unused remainder, turned out to be a concept with no word in the Oviath lexicon, a concept that the convergence processed across 67 ships and eventually built into the central term of a treaty between our two species. That is not something I did. That is something that happened because of what I did, in a causal chain I had no visibility into and no intention of producing. I was cutting up egg powder at 6:15 in the morning and I ended up cutting a card at 11:42. 2 cuts, both of them necessary, neither of them strategic. The egg powder, for the record, was salvageable. It took about 40 minutes of handwork and the texture was a little dense in the final product, but nobody complained. 340 people ate breakfast and went to do whatever they needed to do that day. And most of them did not know that the Oviath delegation was walking through the logistics corridor at that moment, or that one of them was going to stop at the ticket station and look at it with hungry eyes, or that a cook was going to notice and do the obvious thing. The obvious thing, that is what it was. The obvious thing done at the right time for the right reason, which was simply that there was a person who needed it. That is all. I know I keep saying that. I keep saying that is all and then continuing, which suggests that I do not fully believe it is all, that there is something more I am trying to say that has not come out cleanly yet. Here is what is more. The card is on my desk, the 3 empty boxes. I look at them and I think about what she said, that the Oviath do not divide permission, that permission belongs to a body or does not exist. And I wonder sometimes what it would be like to live in a system where the unused part of a thing simply expires, where there is no such concept as moving the remainder, where the excess at the end of a draw cycle is not waste to be minimized, but simply the natural expiration of permission that was issued and not exercised, an unremarkable outcome, a closed account. I cannot fully imagine it. I have spent my entire working life in the waste minimization business. Every broth pot, every card, every draw cycle is a small argument against expiration. You reduce the stock down because you don't want the flavors to expire before they've done their work. You cut the card so the unused draw doesn't expire unused. You find where the surplus is sitting, and you move it to where it is needed, because the alternative is that it disappears and someone goes without who did not have to. Maybe that is the human thing, more than any of the other things that have been written about human exceptionalism in the contact literature. Not the endurance, not the aggression, not the adaptability, not the fearlessness in the face of hostile environments. Those are all real and documented. But there is also this: we move the remainder. We look at the unused part of a thing and we think, someone could use that. We have been doing it so long we do not even think of it as a decision. It is just how the system works. The card can be cut, the excess can be redirected, the remainder can choose. She came back for the second bowl, and she came back for the third, and she went home with a half card in her pocket and a word her people did not have before. The 3 empty boxes are on my desk. I am not going to use them. I am going to let them be the part that remains. I will add only this last thing, which is not about the card or the broth or the convergence or the treaty. It is about Orville, who worked the prep table that morning with her knife and her short, quick strokes, and who did not know what was happening at the service window 6 meters behind her. Orville has been in kitchens for 31 years. She has worked in forward operations and permanent installations in civilian service, and twice on hospital ships. She is better with a knife than anyone I have worked with. She does not talk much during service, which is the sign of a person who is thinking about what they are doing rather than about what they want people to know they are doing. She asked me later that evening after Brusk had come and gone. That was one of them, wasn't it? At the window. I said yes. She said I thought so. She dried her hands on her apron. She come back. Twice, I said. Third time she brought the others. Orville nodded, the way she nods when a thing has worked out the way it ought to. Not surprised, not impressed, just nodding that the outcome was correct. Good broth today, she said. The reduction was right. Yes, it was, I said. You get the root vegetables in at the right time. I always get them in at the right time, she said. She went back to the prep station and I went back to the sink, and the kitchen closed down the way it always does. One station at a time, in the right order, everything stored and covered and ready for tomorrow. That is what I remember when I think about the third morning of first contact. The broth was right. Orville got the root vegetables in at the right time. The remainder chose. Some mornings that is all there is, and it is enough.